All right. Mic check, making sure everybody can hear me. It is good to be here today. I know everybody is wrapping up the end of the year. And so I just want to go ahead and kick off, guys. We've got a great conversation here, a couple of really good questions. And really, we're going to talk about the double consciousness of our communications community who have been on the front lines of all things DEI this year. As you guys know, or should know, if unless you've been under a rock this year, we've had tons of things happening in the media. And I think a lot of what has shifted over the last few years is that all of the trauma, all of the tragedies that we experience as individuals in our personal lives, we do end up bringing those conversations into the virtual and physical workplaces. And what we're seeing more and more is that our companies internally and externally are crafting messaging and taking stances and raising their voices on behalf of the communities that serve within them. But oftentimes that puts us in a really funky space, right? Oftentimes that puts us in a space where you are speaking on behalf of yourself as a person of a marginalized community, an impacted community, but also as a professional actually working in the business, particularly those who are responsible for communications. And so as Nate said, the conversation we're having today is double consciousness in communications and cultural fluency. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the terminology double consciousness, but really and truly what we're saying, what we mean when we're saying that is the concept that was coined by W.E.B. Dubois, which has evolved into defining an experience of underrepresented people who experience a split in consciousness, merging their cultural heritage with dominant society or dominant white society, right? And so from the point of view of those in communications who both shape the narrative, but also experience what's happening on the outside, I've got three folks with me, and I'm going to jump into questions just so we can talk about what their experience has been this year and always, of course, with having to be the voice on behalf of those of us in these corporate and creative spaces, but also having to be the people of the communities that we're talking about. It's not an easy space to sit in. And also, I just want to give a shout out to Kelly Harrison over at EA. I want to say this conversation is not mine of my own. I started having this conversation with Kelly back over the summer. And although she's not here with us today, definitely want to give her a shout out. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick off the first question, right? So in corporate spaces, we rely on subject matter expertise, on the subject matter expertise of our communication leaders to help give voice to our businesses and the communities of people who work within them, right? So I can imagine that part of that voice is rooted in your knowledge of corporate affairs and how to craft sentences and how to make your subject lines pithy, right? But I actually want to get a sense of what those other areas of culture or other areas of consciousness, as we're going to say for this conversation, might be for those of you here on this call. And I want to know, how does that perspective explicitly impact the work that you do? And so I'll kick off, right? So yeah, I'm a DEI leader. I also come from the project management space. But if you talk to me, you know a couple of things about me. I love hip hop. I love culture. I love cracking jokes. And I sometimes like to hear myself speak. And all of those things actually get thrown into my perspective as I bring it to the table. And so I'll kick off with who's first on my screen. Graham, you're first on my screen, actually. Can you share with the folks that are watching us live right now, what are the areas of culture that you bring to the table and how does that impact the work that you do?
Because you started with your love of music, I'm going to start by sharing that I wore my Sade shirt for you. Just so everyone knows.
I appreciate it.
Nice.
It's so crazy to have to list, to just put it on paper and go wow, these are all things that I sort of inherently bring in layers to every single day. There's the gay perspective, which is sort of funny in light of recent conversations I've had about the way that brands see us as LGBTQ and talk about us as LGBTQ. And that makes sense because we're a community, but no one self-identifies that way, or the tendency is not to, right? I am a gay man, and there is repression that comes with that, and there is privilege that comes with that, and to sort of figure out that balance as things go along. I see it as a strong advantage more and more. And someone helped me encapsulate it in a conversation last week, that it's less about being a man who is attracted to men and more about someone who loves on their terms. And when you think about LGBTQ people as people who express and love on their terms, like, whoa, like the power that opens up and the create like the cultural creativity that's sort of innate in that, it just gets more empowering by the day. I'm glad I had that conversation last week. um, I've got the perspective of a Latin or Latinx, still figuring out the phrase for me, person who doesn't look like it. I get sometimes the "you look like this," and then depending on other situations, it's like, "But you don't look like this." And it's important to acknowledge I have a strong Latinx family background that shapes the way that I view work and family and connection, and that bears into things, even though I know I'm perceived in other ways sometimes. So that's really important. Also, a 43-year-old who doesn't look like it. We can go down the ageism road all we want, but I get a bunch of, when I turned 40, I was working on AARP. People were like, "You don't look 40." I was like, "Yes, I do. Here's why that's important." And then finally, there was a comedy and artistry background, coming from a place of humanity and finding the tension in things. Like that's what comedy is, and comedy is about delivering that through brevity. So that's all playing into what I bring to the work.
I love that. So we've got Latin American background. We have got your comedy background. We have got your self-identification. And I love hearing that. And shout out to never looking your age and being forever beautiful, whatever that means to you. I'm gonna kick it over to E. Luke. E. Luke, tell us a little bit more. Go ahead and answer the question through your own lens. What are you bringing to the table and how is that impacting your work? Oh, you're on mute. We got to get you off mute.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I would think my first thing I'm bringing, my expertise is I'm also close friends with Kelly Harrison. So shout out to Kels. That's my first flex. I'm also the daughter of a Haitian immigrant and a Black woman who always reminds me where I'm from. I grew up in a predominantly Black community in a suburb of New York. I've been surrounded by diversity my whole life. I come from a family with many people who are neurodiverse. So, really understanding different ways that people think and show up and socialize. No one in my family works in corporate America. So, there's a different vision of what a standard family looks like, what a career looks like. Not everybody is doing what I do. I am single and 36. So, a very different picture of modern womanhood. Not so much for New York City. There's a lot of people like me, but as it relates to the way we talk about being a woman in society right now, I'm also multi-ethnic. So my mother is Haitian, my father is white and Chinese. So we celebrated lots of different holidays when I was growing up. And lastly, I'm a failed actress. I pursued that dream until I was about 23 and I loved it. But I realized I love fame and storytelling, not actually being in front of the camera. But that really helps me in the work that I do.
Nothing about failure is what I perceive when I look at you, but definitely love that you have taken a foot into the acting world. And thank you for sharing that. Felicia, girl, it's your turn. What are you bringing to the table and how is that impacting what you do on a day to day basis?
This is an interesting exercise for me because I don't describe myself a lot. But here it goes. I am a Black first generation Canadian Caribbean girl from Toronto who grew up in a very multicultural environment. I learned that there were people that looked very different from me, and my family practiced different religions and introduced me to various cultures at a very young age. Then I moved to Buffalo, where I was around nothing but people that look like me, right? Then fast forward to high school, college, adulting in New York. And now I have an overwhelming appreciation and respect for different ethnicities and cultures with an endless, curious nature and what I perceive to, be a kind heart. I try my best to lead with empathy and love in all situations, but especially in this work.
I love that. Thank you so much. And Felicia, every time you introduce yourself as being from Toronto and Caribbean and all of that, I just hear Drake play. I feel like you might have been in that SNL in the SNL skit, the I guess this past weekend, one of Drake's tings, perhaps. You need to go get your money, girl. All right. So you're actually the perfect transition into my first overall question. And I'm gonna ground this for everybody watching right now, watching and listening, right? So I really want to make sure that we understand the different perspectives that we're bringing to the table, because the different perspectives that we bring to the table into our work are going to affect how we respond when we are actually in the space where we have to speak about what's happening on the outside. And so this year in particular, right, we've seen a lot of instances where the broader cultural and social challenges and tragedies rather, have found themselves to be top of conversation in the workplace. So we used to call it the water cooler, but now it's like a proverbial virtual water cooler, but still the conversation nonetheless, be it in your BRGs, your workspaces, your early morning calls, etc., right? We've seen mass shootings, unfortunately, particularly in Buffalo, New York, Uvalde, Texas, and most recently in Colorado Springs, to name a few. I know that there's always more before and after that, but those are the ones that I'd like to acknowledge in this moment. Of course, the overturning of the Dobbs decision was had a major impact for many of us, not just due to gender, but just lifestyle in general. And these things are really hard to talk about. They're hard to talk about because they affect us on such a personal level. And so these moments of tragedy and division are difficult. But what I wonder is what impact these moments or moments like these have on each of you as both individuals with intersections tied to some of these events and the voices in the corporate spaces that are tasked with addressing these difficult moments. And so, Felicia, with respectfully, I am going to start with you. As you mentioned that you come from Buffalo, you have some roots down in Buffalo, as that was one of the first things that we saw that we had to discuss in the workplace. How did that impact you?
So I've learned that I am a fierce protector of my tribe, which includes my family, my friends, and my community as a whole, right? When the shooting happened in Buffalo, I felt so helpless, as I usually feel in these situations. Then panic, right? Where's my family? Where are my friends? Where's my godchildren? Um, Needing to make sure that they were safe. When I knew they were, there was a brief moment of relief. Then the messages on Facebook started flooding in to my timeline, friends who lost close family members in that tragic moment. And I immediately felt helpless again, sick and rageful. All of these emotions, mind you, in a matter of days. Um, what I didn't mention was work. Honestly, nothing about work was on my mind. I felt numb and super emotional. So anything in that moment could have thrown me off. Um, I will say what helped me through that was speaking to the members of my BRG and hearing how they felt, getting that grief off my chest to people who understood more than anyone at that organization could. We all remember how it was in the office after Trayvon Martin, right? After the South Carolina church massacre. While we had to come to work in pieces, it was still business as usual for everybody else. And I can at least say that I feel like the tide is turning for the better in that regard.
I agree that the tide is turning for the better in that regard. But I'm gonna throw the next question over to you, Luke, just to get a sense, right? So like I said, and like Felicia said, we've really started openly having conversations. It's only recently become the norm for your corporate space or your company to address what's happening in the news and to address social issues. But and that's good, right? Like, let's acknowledge progress where it happens, right? We've got to count our wins even when they're nuanced, even when they're small. And I know that there's more to do, but I'd love to get a sense from you, like, what is that more to do? How can we push? What needs to happen next outside of just having the conversations and addressing it? Are there any additional blocks that need to be lifted so that people are able to be more comfortable. And also, you as a communication leader who often identifies with impacted communities, so so that you can have a more comfortable experience kind of being our voice on our behalf.
Yeah, I mean, your questions are very deep and thought-provoking, and really get to the core issues of the types of emotional, things that we have to deal with. And I think that in terms of evolution, we have to also recognize we're not going to solve for white supremacy in corporate America. We're not going to solve for white supremacy in the world. But activism is about really repeatedly working towards something, working towards change, working towards your cause. And I actually have to plug a documentary I just saw last week called Lowndes County and the Road to Black Power. And it really brought us back to 1966, 67, 68, where people were fighting for their lives and getting shot and trying to get a basic right to vote, which is still a problem today. But watching how the activists came together as community to do the impossible was extremely motivating and gave me a sense of, power in that there's opportunity for us to facilitate change. And I know I have already. I feel so good about the impact that I've left at the companies I've been at so far. But right now, I'm the type of calm person that looks at this as an opportunity. We know that Edelman Trust research shows that 73% of Gen Z consumers buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values. That means the future is even more value-oriented than us as millennials and boomers. So that gives us an opportunity to say, hey, we need fair representation. My number one quest, where I try to be an activist in corporate America is in representation and getting hired and getting seats at the table and securing the bag for people who deserve it. 14% of this country, let's just use Black in America. 14% of this country is Black, but there seems to be a benchmark of success at 4% in tech companies. Why is that? There's opportunity to move that needle forward. And for me, when I've seen even hiring 10 people that I know to Twitter, that transformed the way that Twitter showed up to the world. So in my view, this is a representation issue. It's not a pipeline problem. It's an HR problem. It's a hiring manager problem. And organizations need to earn the right to stand for issues. And the only way, as Baratunde said, that you can do that is by actually embodying it internally. So the work starts at home first, and then you can consider how you're able to navigate your workplace using power centers like ERGs.
Thank you, Iluk. Graham, I'm going to take a next question over to you, and it's kind of following a little bit off of what Iluk was talking about speaking about with companies needing to take a stand and needing to kind of interject themselves into these conversations. One of the things I think is important for everyone to ask themselves before they dive into kind of just showing up, particularly in communication spaces, is, do we have the right to show up in these spaces, right? Because we've seen this, we will always go back to the black squares. The black squares were the new Pepsi, right? And so we know that you need to be very explicit and very authentic when you do speak or advocate on behalf of communities, even when it's your own. But I wonder if you have ever found yourself in a space where you've questioned if you were the right person to take on the role of being the voice on behalf of impacted communities based on what's going on in external culture within the workplace. Like, have you ever had a sense of, imposter syndrome or not quite sure that you're the right guy? And if you have, can you tell us a little bit about that?
The answer in terms of questioning my place as any sort of leader or voice in this is every day, all the time. And actually, so much of what Iluk said took me back to a specific place in terms of accountability, even earlier than anything we've discussed as we prepared for this session, where the secret origins of Do the Work sort of unfold here. As you referred to the black square, I think of everything I ever wrote on social media for a decade. It was all rhetoric. It was all theory. It was all ideas. Confession, until 10 years ago, I wasn't political. Whoa. And the realization that to become an active contributor to society, and you know, it's like I had to do something. I had to do something that even if I was right about the ideas, that I had to start, like, you know, if I wanted to jump into politics, I had to accept that, like, oh, like what is politics except the decisions about like who gets what resources and who gets what access. Okay, we're all involved in politics. So to become actively political means that I have to understand those networks of privilege, and I have to give some things up. If I'm going to like start spouting all this intellectual stuff, even if it's right, I have to start behaving in accordance with that. And I think that you know, from a corporate standpoint, and this is where a lot of what Luke said was really resonating with me, is like corporations are going through the same thing. I think as they recognize that that they are a part of this, like that they have never been divorced from politics, that they've never been divorced from society, that they profit from society, that they have to, okay, if I'm going to start saying the right thing, then I have to start maybe giving some things up or start operating in a different way. And that's really a big ship to turn. You have to bring entire, so not only do corporate leaders have to go through a process maybe similar to what I went through, but then they have to bring the whole organization in line with that. It is because of my past and my failure to act in the past, and the lack of experience that I have. Have I ever run an LGBTQ focused ad campaign? Nope. Have I ever run an agency? Nope. But I sort of decided before I started to co-chair and co-found Do the Work that if anyone ever came to me and said, what right do you have to do this? The answer would simply be, I'm doing it. That I'm doing it, that I'm talking to people, that I'm going out there, and there's all these things that we're accomplishing that like haven't been done before. So like just the simple act of doing them, like what is a futurist? The person who envisions the future and then just starts making it, right? Like, and then what right does anyone have to decide the future? It's like you take that responsibility on yourself, but it is a responsibility.
I love that. And I'm actually going to dig deeper into what I just asked you with another question we discussed before. You know, in our initial prep call, you mentioned experiencing a rabbit hole of thoughts about wanting to be a leader versus being the LGBTQ plus leader. Do you feel like there is a choice to make between the two of them? And is there a world where you can be both at the same time?
So as a communications professional, I help a lot of people decide how they want to be put out there. And I talk to a lot of women specifically about this, the ones that want to be considered for the 40 over 40 women's list, but also like, why does it have to be for women? Why can't it just be 40 over 40? But also, why does it have to be 40 over 40? Like all these, I recognize the importance of me being seen as a woman leader, but I also don't want to be just thought of as a woman leader. And I really started to sympathize with that, especially as I started to take on the Do the Work role, knowing that I might just be the gay guy in advertising forever. We put labels on things, we put brands on things. That is the nature of our business, is simple messages that people understand. And so, you know, for me to be someone who runs a platform that's about representation, share of voice, and equality for LGBTQ people in advertising, people might just go, oh, the guy who fights for gay guys. Okay. this sort of I keep thinking of so many things recently in terms of my value versus my market value. Okay, I know my value. And by the way, Luke, I'm so glad that you said that you were single. I also think I get like perceptions about myself as a single person, and it's always just like, oh, you don't have someone yet. It's like, I know my value, I recognize my market value. And it becomes very similar with this. What am I in the business of? Taking a brand and changing its market value, making people aware of what the value of that is. So there's already, I was never going to get every opportunity. No one is, right? And I recognize that with privilege, I get certain ones that other people may not, but I was never going to get every opportunity. And there are certain people who will turn away the gay guy in advertising. That's fine. I don't need every opportunity from everyone. What I do need to do and what I need to focus on is understanding that if that's my market value and if that's the perception of me, that I have to reinvent the value of what it means to be the LGBTQ person fighting for my community and the power of that community in the work that we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Felicia, I'm going to throw the next question over to you. And then, Eluk, I have a question for you. And then we're going to jump into questions. Okay. Questions from the
Yeah.
audience. So, Felicia, you first. In our initial conversation, right, just as we were getting prepared for how we were going to steer this conversation, you shared with us that you felt that this work requires a splintering of self as you've had to create the conversation, moderate the safety of it, report about it, translate it for external communities. And listening to you with everything I got going on in my life, girl, I was tired. I was tired. I was tired. And I can only imagine that doing those things yourself is even more tired than just hearing it. And you know, psychological safety is important to all of us right now. We have no choice but to protect ourselves literally from the inside out to be able to survive and thrive in this world we live in. And so I want to get a sense of like, how do you manage the weight of this splintering, and how do you recommend that other leads such as yourself navigate it in a way that's emotionally safe?
This is such a great question. Definitely had to think about all of the things that I do. But firstly, I go back to the beginning, right? And remember who I am. As Graham said, I'm doing the work, right? We're doing it. Remember who I am and who I feel like God, the universe, called me to do this work. I remember that everything I've experienced has led me to this exact moment, right? And how grateful I am to be here. Grief release and rest is another major practice for me. I'm a crier. I'll cry to commercial. I'll cry when somebody's really happy. I cry. And sometimes that's all I need to get up and carry on. My family and friends keep me strong and hungry to keep going. So have good people around you for sure, right? Have that good energy around you. My therapist keeps me sane, and helps me to find peace in volatile times, through grounding exercises and journaling. And lastly, my guides and my ancestors are always moving me forward, speaking life into me, making me uncomfortable when I'm still for too long. All of these entities cover me and grant me the space I need to be whole again.
That's amazing, and definitely some stuff that I need to pick up on as well. I'm a crier, been crying all week, y'all. It's been a hell of a week. So thank you for that. Luke, my personal last question is for you, and then we're gonna toss it over to a couple that I see in the chat right now. So I give you your flowers, and I just hope that you know I stand and I am a fan. And one of my favorite things that I got to experience out of your output into the world this year was the Pinterest Can Beach activation that you put together this summer at the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity. And I found the space was not only just beautifully done, right? Like aesthetically pleasing. I do not use the social medias as much as I used to, but I was in there taking every picture and posting it, right? Mainly beyond the beauty, what I felt in it was that it encompassed some of the most beautifully nuanced cultural cues that authentically and explicitly nodded to Black culture. It was definitely an opportunity where it's like, if you didn't know, it was cool because it was beautiful, fun, vibrant. But if you knew, you knew. If you know, you know. And we were all with it, right? And so I want to get a sense from you, because I know a lot of folks want to know, like, how do you inject that nuance of culture into the work you do, whatever your culture is, whatever that consciousness that you're bringing to the table. I want to know, while being exclusive, while being inclusive of what should be considered your core audience, how were you able to, or why was it important for you rather to create a space of comfort for those who were also underrepresented at the event?
Absolutely. And Kai, thank you so much for the flowers. I will take those, dry them up, and hang them up forever, because we're working on this together. In terms of, the activation in Cannes, we are just so proud of what we created. It was led by an Asian woman who understands culture. Shout out to Judy Lee and her team. But also what we did was we looked to Pinterest, our platform, and see what are people searching for. And we do that through an inclusive lens, because like Mark Pritchard was saying on LinkedIn, I think it was last week, it's not multicultural marketing, it's marketing. And so that should be embodied every step of the way. And that team nailed it. They did a phenomenal job. I know you're also loving the tattoo you got there. So we took some risks, right? Like that also is, it's not just your average event. We had no speakers. We just did activities because we wanted to show how Pinterest comes to life. And for every brand, there's an opportunity to nail it. And we were able to do that time. And we're really lucky that the execution worked out. But what I'm most proud of is that we also created space for Black people. We had a Black creatives on the beach happy hour. We had an Asian leaders breakfast. And what was my purpose of the Black creators on the beach happy hour? The same as my purpose that I do everything, which I mentioned before. 1, seat at the table. 2, get friends to secure the bag. 3, not a pipeline problem, right? So we had this Black creatives on the beach happy hour. Yes, we're showing how Pinterest can show up for culture. We're bringing ourselves together and coming together and drinking and eating and vibing with music. But the other objective is to say, hey, most of these Pinterest executives that are sharing this space with us have not seen this many qualified Black people in their lives. Maybe they'll learn something. Maybe they'll be surprised to know that there's this entire rich community of people that exists that you have no idea about. And you don't even know what we're talking about, how we're styled. And we all look so good. You're like, everyone's dripping. So that to me is a huge part of the push. It's reaching out to the community, but also bringing the community in so that the executives can say, we want more of this. And I say, you want more of it? I'll tell you how to do it. Hire them. That's the only way. Outside of that, it's going to be pasty and tasteless, like the work is if you don't include people. So it's a win-win situation for me. And for it to be Kai Lawson approved, check. I did my job.
Cosign, total cosign. So speaking of bringing the community in, I think it's only fair that we turn our vantage point to the folks watching. We've got a couple of questions in the chat right now. And so I'll start with Evan. Evan says, I work in media analytics and we struggle to find qualified Americans in general. I am LOLing at qualified Americans in general. We need to catch people in high school and college so they can compete against international competition, for sure. How do we do more in this area? So media analytics, getting more folks at a younger, more junior level into the field so they can compete. Any thoughts on that?
I can actually take this because while I was in the jewelry industry, this was something we wanted to bridge the gap between high school students and professionals within the industry. And we created a series where we had these professionals. We had a three episode series where we had jewelry designers speaking to students. We had a college bound discussion. And then we had a brand strategist come in and discuss what a brand actually was. And the high school students took a stab at creating their own brands in the process. And I feel like what that ended up doing was really giving them some insight into a career that they didn't even know existed, right? And so I feel like we just need to tap in to these young minds as early as possible, even if it's, bringing them to the office, showing them exactly what you do on a basic level, so they could at least start thinking about something other than the norm, being a doctor or being an astronaut or whatever comes to mind. But I feel like the students were extremely curious. They were asking questions that designers 5-10 years in the game were asking. And so I think we just need to start tapping into a lot of the educational tools and resources, like career and training programs that NYC actually has with New York City high schools, and getting a curriculum or getting a presentation in front of these students early so they know that they have options.
I love that. Thank you so much. I'm going to throw the next question out here from Garrett Kellogg. Hey, Garrett. Um, I know Graham and Felicia, you both kind of answered this question already, but I'd love to get maybe Luke your perspective on this. What do you use to snap out of imposter syndrome? I don't know if you're like me and you deal with that. Well, I guess Graham and I deal with it every day, all day, early. But would love to get a sense from you. How might you actually combat any imposter syndrome?
Yeah, interesting question. And I don't know what it is about me, but I don't have imposter syndrome. I'm here. I deserve it. I have
Sell it to
something
me.
to say. And that's my case. Like I don't feel it. I feel a lot of things. I feel anxiety. I feel anger. I can be abrasive. All of the things. But in terms of imposter syndrome, I don't feel it. And maybe this is why. One thing that I would tell anybody who's dealing with imposter syndrome, and you saw me do it today, just bring in some statistics. Talk about what's happening in society. Bring in a number. You will sound so smart. I use that with every exec prep, and I will impart that along to you as well. Start talking about the numbers. It works every time. And also, before you go to meetings, think about your key messages. What are the things I want to say? Think before you speak. Maybe write it down first. I don't have imposter syndrome, but I do get nervous. When I get nervous, I'll talk in front of the mirror. I talked in front of the mirror before this opportunity. Write down what you're going to say. There are ways to prepare, and then bring in a number, boom, and you look like a genius. So those are my tips.
I go for it.
I also ground myself in the data, but like when I'm at my worst and I'm just like, wow, I really need to like remind myself who I am. The data is simply factually to write down or to mentally inventory everything that I have done successfully, period. Someone else comes up to you and goes, oh, Graham used to do stand up, and you go, stop. And, oh, Graham, like, co founded this thing, and it's like, stop. And, but when you doubt yourself, if you just list, yeah, I had a 5-year moderately successful stand-up career. Check. I have a 23-year career. Check. I don't have a relationship. I've rejected 12 bad ones. Check. All of these things I have done. And then, by the way, if you think about the fact that not one of them came close to defeating me as a human being, that I am still here, and that though I feel bad sometimes, I feel good a ton of the time. So if I just list all those things that never beat me, it's like, then I can do, there's not much I have really tried that I've failed at. That's the incentive to try.
I love that. And now I have Tisha Campbell in the back of my head singing, I'm still here. Yeah, all of that. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It will get you through all of life. The last question that we have is from Josh Torres. Hey, Josh, how you doing? Josh says, how do you balance focusing on the work you are doing individually with building community among collaborators focused on other aspects of the movement, as it is all intersectional? Follow-up, did all of you know each other before this panel? And if not, do you plan on collaborating in the future? I will start with the latter part of the question. And then I'd love to get, because it looks like we've got 5 more minutes for Q&A, use the rest of the 5 minutes for these lovely beings in front of you all to answer the first portion. And so the reality is I knew all of the folks here before they did. And so this is one of those moments where you always want to bring like your really cool friends together, the people that you've met in your life. And you're like, if these people could just be in a room with a glass of something, water or whatnot, and just have conversation and like shoot the shit and say some really dope things to each other, it would just like combust into something beautiful. So this crew here, these folks here, I knew them, but they had the lovely opportunity to meet each other during our prep calls and listen to each other. And I can only imagine that beyond that, they are going to keep in touch virtually, and I'm sure from time to time run into each other physically. So that's going to be dope. So with that, you guys, how do you balance focusing on your work you're doing as a person, as an individual, and collaborating amongst others in relation to the movement of DE&I?
I can go in there. I would love to reframe that. So it's not work that I'm doing individually and then building community with collaborators. Everything I do is collaborative. I am my own entity. I'm not my job. I'm not my ERG. So I just became an adjunct professor at USC teaching managing diversity in complex organizations. I am doing work that might relate to Pinterest, like, Can on the Beach. But I also might use connections that I've made at Pinterest for something that's completely outside of the job. There are no barriers or lanes. It's just opportunities. And I basically take whatever is right for me whenever I see it and go as hard as I can, trying to create a balance with rest. But I'm a really passionate person, and we make it work across the board. And we have to all move together. So I don't look at it as individual with like collaborators. It's more like, who are my collaborators for this project, and looking at my life and the work that I'm doing on a project basis alongside my full-time job.
Awesome. It looks like we got 3 more minutes left. So either Felicia or Graham, you take it, and then we will toss it over because I don't want anyone to miss what's coming up next.
I can jump in really quickly. Basically, for the last part of the question, I'm a baby in this game, so I am growing my network. So Luke and Graham after this for sure. And then as far as the collaboration part, I've always been a relationship builder. It's a part of my DNA. It's who I am. So again, I'm with Luke on that. Anything that I do, I want to do it with other people. I want to be in the rooms. I want to listen. I want to learn. I want to grow, and I want to evolve. And you can't do that alone. So it's, for me, it's always a team effort.
Awesome. Graham, go ahead and take it.
Echoing that all of this is collaborative. I think that in terms of finding the balance of intersectionality versus specific communities, the question is, what's the most effective place to start? Which sounds real basic, but like there's this happens a lot with LGBTQ stuff. Do we call on the allies at the beginning? Because we want everyone in the room. We eventually want everyone in the room. Or do we start with the LGBTQ community, figure some things out for ourselves, and then sort of expand to allies? There's a big initiative we're working on that is so inherently intersectional that we're starting with everyone in the room. And even though that's so many voices to account for, great. That's so many voices to account for, right? So I think just questioning where you can start and making sure that you ask that before you assume is a really good place to sort of figure out how to get things moving.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate all of you for joining. I appreciate all of my speakers, Felicia, Luke, Graham, for joining. Hug your comms people, y'all. They need it. Maybe your DEI people too. Like, just a little bit of love is really going to go a long way. And with that, Nate, I'm going to throw this conversation back over to you so you can keep it going. Thanks all.